March 7, 1978. London. The kind of morning that arrives in early spring with the memory of winter still in it, pale sky, cold air that smelled faintly of damp pavement and someone's breakfast frying 2 floors above a bedding shop. On a narrow back street in Ladbroke Grove, between a dry cleaner and a locksmith whose sign had been missing 2 letters for the better part of a decade, a small recording studio occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian terrace. The sign above the door read Crown Sound, painted in red letters on a black board, the paint beginning to lift at the corners. Inside, the front reception smelled of machine coffee, warm electronics, and the particular combination of cigarette smoke and magnetic tape that in 1978 was simply the smell of recorded music. Before we go any further, if this is the kind of story that stays with you long after the video ends, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because we put one of these out every single week, and we would hate for you to miss what's coming. Crown Sound was not a famous studio. What it had was 2 live rooms, a mixing board its owner had purchased secondhand and repaired himself over 3 weekends, and a reputation in the neighborhood as the studio where you could get an hour of real tape for a price that didn't require a record deal first. That reputation had made it, over 6 years, the first studio for a particular kind of musician. Young, unconnected, Caribbean mostly, playing music that the larger studios on the other side of London had not yet decided was worth their time. The engineer on Wednesday mornings was a man named Derek Howell, 43 years old, with the lean efficiency of a man who had been doing the same precise job for 20 years. He understood microphone placement, signal chain, room acoustics, tape speed, and the hierarchy of equipment that separated professional from amateur. He was not a cruel man. He was simply a man whose professional confidence had become indistinguishable from personal certainty, a slow process that happens when nobody around you has the standing to push back. He arrived at Crown Sound at 8:30 every Wednesday, made coffee, ran signal checks, and waited for whoever had booked first. He had no particular feelings about the music itself, only about the quality of the recording, which he pursued with the focused attention of a craftsman who has confused the vessel for what it contains. Samuel Joseph arrived at 9:05. He was 23 years old, from Port of Spain, Trinidad, 2 years in London, working as a kitchen porter in a Paddington hotel, and spending every hour outside the kitchen either sleeping or writing songs in the narrow room he rented above a West Indian grocery. He had a voice that his grandmother, who had raised him after his mother left for New York when he was 4, had told him was a gift with a responsibility attached. You had to use it for something true, or it would eventually leave you and find someone who would. He had been taking this seriously, quietly, for his entire life. He had saved for 8 months, double shifts when they came, not replacing the split jacket, walking instead of busing, calculating and recalculating the number in the envelope under his winter sweaters. He had booked 1 hour at Crown Sound because 1 hour was what he could afford, and he intended to record 2 songs. That was not entirely realistic for 1 hour, but it was the number of songs he had that felt ready, and he was not going to change it. He carried his guitar in a hard case that had belonged to a musician back in Port of Spain who had pressed it into his hands at the airport and said only, "Take care of it and it'll take care of you." Inside was a 1969 Yamaha FG 180 acoustic, bought new for $32 and played nearly every day since. It was not valuable by any catalog. The lacquer had thinned from years of playing. The nut had been replaced once, imperfectly, with a piece of bone sitting slightly high on the treble side, not ideal technically, but part of the instrument's voice now, built into how it spoke. The top had developed a gentle bellying under the bridge from years of string tension, which had deepened the bass response in a way a careful listener would have found interesting. Samuel did not know all of this in those terms. He knew the guitar the way you know a person you have spent years beside, by feel, by sound, by how it responded to different pressures from his right hand, learned gradually the way all real knowledge of instruments is learned. He signed in at the reception desk and was shown to the small live room by a young assistant who asked if he wanted coffee and then forgot to bring it. He set the case on the chair beside the microphone stand, opened it, and took out the guitar. He was tuning it when Derek Howell came through the door from the control room, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other, and stopped. He looked at the guitar the way he looked at all equipment that was brought into his studio. With a rapid technical assessment that took approximately 3 seconds and arrived at a conclusion he was not in the habit of keeping to himself. "What is that?" Derek said, not unkindly exactly, the tone of a man asking a question he already knows the answer to. Samuel looked up. "It's a Yamaha FG 180 from 1969. Derek set his clipboard on the top of a rack unit and picked up the guitar without asking. He turned it over once, looked at the bellied top, pressed lightly on the body, plucked the open B string and listened to it with his head tilted. He set it back down. "This is going to be a problem," he said. "The action's too high on the treble side. The top's lifted under the bridge. The resonance is going to be uneven across the frequency range. Honestly," he paused, and in the pause was the specific weight of a professional opinion about to be delivered without invitation, "this isn't really a recording guitar. You'd be better off with something from our higher cupboard. We've got a Martin D28 and a Guild. Either of those will give you a clean signal I can actually work with." Samuel looked at him for a moment. "This is my guitar," he said quietly. "I understand that," Derek said, in the tone of a man who does not entirely understand that. "But we only have an hour and the quality of the source matters. A cheap guitar is always going to give you a cheap recording. That's just the physics." In the hallway outside the live room, footsteps had stopped. Crown Sound shared its building with a small management office on the floor above, and the hallway that ran past the studio's live rooms connected to the stairwell at the far end. The footsteps belonged to a man who had come down from the management office, where he had been for the past 40 minutes in a conversation about tour logistics for an upcoming European run that had been scheduled and rescheduled 3 times, and was beginning to wear on everyone involved. He was on his way out. He had his jacket in one hand, olive green army jacket, heavy cotton, and his knitted tam in the other, having taken it off in the warmth of the office upstairs. His dreadlocks were loose around his shoulders. He was in a hurry, or had been, until the voice from inside the live room reached him through the partially open door. He stood in the hallway and listened. He heard the word cheap. He heard the word physics. He heard the silence from inside the room that followed, which was the silence of a young man deciding whether to fight or fold. He had heard that silence before. He had been inside that silence himself, a long time ago in a different city, and he knew exactly what it felt like from the inside. He pushed the door open and stepped into the live room. Derek turned. He saw a man in his early 30s, tall, lean, dreadlocks to his shoulders, a jacket over one arm and a tam in his hand, standing in the doorway with the particular calm that belongs to people who are never in a hurry because they have learned that the world rearranges itself around patience rather than urgency. "Sorry to interrupt," the man said, and his voice had the soft, unhurried lilt of Jamaica in it. "I heard you talking about the guitar." He looked at Derek first, then at Samuel. Then his eyes went to the Yamaha on the chair, and something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, but the way a person's face shifts when they recognize something. "Do you mind?" he said to Samuel, gesturing toward the guitar. Samuel looked at him, at the dreadlocks, at the wooden pendant at his collar, at the quality of stillness in his face, and without entirely knowing why, shook his head and held out the instrument. "Do you believe that the right person hearing your music at the right moment can change the entire direction of your life? Write it in the comments below. We read every single one." The man took the guitar and sat on the edge of the chair. He held it for a moment without playing, the way Bob always held an unfamiliar guitar, feeling its weight, pressing the top lightly, running his thumb across the strings to hear them unamplified. He tilted it toward the light from the small window and looked at the bellied top under the bridge. He pressed the bridge lightly with his thumb. 10 years of being played every day, he said to nobody in particular. Maybe more. You can feel it in the wood. Derek Howell stood with his coffee and his clipboard and said nothing. Bob adjusted the strap, Samuel's strap, a worn strip of woven cloth over his shoulder, and settled the guitar across his body. He placed his left hand on the neck, his right hand over the sound hole, and closed his eyes for one breath. Then he began to play. It was a slow opening, a single chord, held long enough for the room to understand what it was dealing with. The Yamaha FG 180 with its high treble action and its bellied top and its $32 original purchase price filled the small live room with a sound that had no right, by Derek Howell's framework, to be as full as it was. The bellying under the bridge that Derek had identified as a flaw had in fact increased the internal volume of the body over years of string tension, and the bone nut that sat slightly high on the treble side gave the upper strings a brightness that cut cleanly through the warmth of the lower register. These were not things Bob articulated. He simply heard them, the way a person hears a voice and understands its character before the words begin. He began to play something that started as rhythm and became melody, the reggae offbeat underneath, that sideways rocking pulse, and above it a line that moved through the chords the way a conversation moves through a subject, circling and returning, finding the same place from different directions. He played for perhaps 90 seconds without singing. The small live room, with its acoustic panels and its low ceiling and its single window, held the sound close and gave it back richer than it arrived. Then he sang. The voice filled the room the way it always filled rooms, not by being loud, which it was not, but by being specific. It carried the weight of everything it had learned from, which was considerable. Trenchtown and the church and the bars of Kingston and the stages of 4 continents, and the particular education that comes from having been shot at and survived, and having stood in front of 12,000 people the next night anyway, because the music was more important than the fear. All of that was in the voice. Not as biography, not as performance, but simply as the natural density of a sound that has been through something real. Samuel stood against the wall of the live room with his arms at his sides and his eyes wide. He had recognized him somewhere in the first 4 bars of the melody, the recognition arriving the way all true recognitions arrive, not with doubt, but with the brief shock of something you know to be true being confirmed by your own senses rather than someone else's description. Derek Howell had set down his coffee. He had set it down carefully, the way you set something down when your hands need to be free of objects so they can simply exist at your sides while you receive something you were not prepared to receive. He was standing in the doorway of the control room, and on his face was the expression of a man who has just had one of his categories complicated in a way that will take some time to fully process. The guitar he had assessed as unsuitable for a real recording was producing, in this room on this tape. He had not turned the tape on, he realized, and reached back without looking to press record, which he did, a sound that was not cheap in any sense that the word had previously meant to him. Bob played for 4 minutes. He played through the structure of something that was partly original and partly a conversation with the instrument itself, finding where it wanted to go and following it there. He played the bridge twice because the first time through it, he heard something in the upper register that he wanted to hear again. When he finished, he let the final chord decay completely, his hand flat against the strings, waiting for the last of the vibration to leave the wood. Silence. Samuel found his voice first. That was, he started, then stopped. Then, that was my chord progression in my second song. Bob looked at him. I know, he said simply. I heard you humming it when I came in. He held out the guitar. It's a good song. The bridge is the best part. Don't let anyone tell you to change it. He stood, set the strap over Samuel's shoulder himself. adjusted it slightly so it sat right. Then he looked at Derek. Derek was standing in the control room doorway with the expression of a man who has something to say, and is for the first time in a long while uncertain whether his words will serve him well. "I didn't realize," he started. Bob looked at him calmly. "The guitar is fine," he said, not sharply, not with the satisfaction of a corrected man enjoying his correction, simply as a fact being stated for the benefit of everyone in the room. "Cheap is what something costs. It has nothing to do with what it's worth." He paused. "This guitar has been played every day for 10 years. That's not in any catalog. You can't buy that. It's in the wood." Do you think we sometimes confuse the price of something with its value in music and in life? Tell us in the comments. We love this conversation. Derek looked at the guitar in Samuel's hands. Then he looked at the control room where the tape was running. He picked up his coffee, set it down again, and said, "I'll extend the session. No charge for the extra time." It was not an apology in any formal sense. It was what an apology looks like in the language of a man who expresses himself through the management of practical things, and everyone in the room understood it as such. Bob put on his jacket. He settled the tam over his dreadlocks and adjusted the collar. He reached into the pocket of the jacket and took out a guitar pick. Old, its edges worn round by years of use, a small inked marking on its surface that Samuel would not decipher until much later. He placed it on top of the open guitar case on the chair. Then he looked at Samuel one final time. "1 hour is enough time," he said, "if you know what you want to say." He nodded once to Derek, who nodded back with the careful respect of a man recalibrating something important about himself, and walked back out into the hallway. His footsteps went down the corridor and up the stairs, and then, after a moment, the front door of Crown Sound opened and closed, and the morning outside received him back without ceremony, the pale March sky and the cold Ladbroke Grove air the same as they had been when he came in. Inside the small live room, Samuel stood holding his Yamaha FG 180 with both hands. He looked at the guitar pick in the open case. He picked it up and held it. Then he looked at Derek, who was back at the mixing board with his hands on the faders, not looking up but with something different in his posture, a slight loosening, a small rearrangement of certainty into something more useful. "Ready?" Derek said. His voice was the same professional voice, but the edge that had been in it earlier was gone or had been moved aside, replaced by something that functioned more like a tension. Samuel put the pick in his shirt pocket, slung the strap over his shoulder, and stepped up to the microphone. "Ready," he said. He recorded both songs in 53 minutes. The session tape, kept by Alistair in a box of unlabeled reels in the Crown Sound archive, would be discovered 11 years later during a building renovation, and pressed onto a limited vinyl run by a small London label specializing in archival Caribbean recordings. The liner notes described the guitar on the recording as possessing an unusual warmth and resonance for an instrument of its type. Nobody knew why. Samuel, by then living in Bristol and teaching music at a secondary school, read the notes and smiled. He had kept the pick in a small tin beside his bed for all 11 of those years. He had used it to record both songs that morning and had never used it for anything else. He had learned, in the years since that March morning, to begin every session, every class, every rehearsal, every time he put a guitar into the hands of a 14-year-old who thought they couldn't do it, with the same words. 1 hour is enough time, if you know what you want to say. On this channel we tell the stories that carry what Bob Marley's music carries, the truth that what something is worth has nothing to do with what it costs. If this story stayed with you today, please subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. And in Bob Marley's own words, "The biggest coward is a man who awakens a woman's love with no intention of loving her." No, tonight, let us leave you with this one. You never know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice.